Hello, I'm Ben Fisher. I work at the Solicitors Regulation Authority in the communications team, and I'm joined today by Julie Brannan, who's the Director of Education and Training and leading on putting together the Solicitors Qualifying Examination. Now, today we're going to be talking about what the SQE assessments cover. Over the summer we finalised exactly what's going to be in there, and so hopefully this webinar gives a short, sharp summary of what you can expect to be covered by the SQE. But before we just go into summarising that detail, Julie, would it be worth just kicking off reminding everyone what the SQE is?
Yes, good idea. So the SQE is a single rigorous assessment, and the point of it is that it's the same series of tests that all candidates who wish to qualify as Solicitors of England and Wales will take. So everybody will meet the same high standards in a consistent way, and this will be regardless of how they have trained, whether they've gone to university to read law, or whether they're a non-law graduate, or whether they're an apprentice, or whether they're an overseas qualified lawyer wanting to re-qualify as an English and Welsh solicitor. So regardless of how they've trained, everybody will take the same series of tests, and we're planning to introduce this in autumn 2021. The intention is that the first SQE assessment, SQE1, will happen in November 2021, and the second part of SQE, SQE2, will happen in April 2022. So as you can see from this slide, there are 4 requirements that we have for people to qualify as solicitors under the new system. Everybody will have to have a degree or equivalent qualification or experience, and the equivalent could, for example, be an apprenticeship. They will have to pass the 2 stages of SQE, that's SQE1 and SQE2, and we'll discuss what they include in detail in a moment. Everybody will have to do at least 2 years of qualifying work experience, and they will have to meet our requirements as to character and suitability to be a solicitor.
Thank you, Julie, and a lot of that stuff is covered in some of our other webinars, but as we say, we're going to cover SQE 1 and 2 today. So let's start off with SQE 1. Now that's the functioning legal knowledge assessment. Now functioning legal knowledge isn't something that was a phrase I'd heard before I came to work here. What does functioning legal knowledge mean, and what does SQE 1 cover?
Yeah, so the functioning legal knowledge, you can see there in the central panel of that slide, it's the core thing that solicitors do. They use their legal knowledge to address client problems. So it needs to be functioning. It's not just being able to recall it. It's not just knowing what the law says. It's knowing what it means and how it applies to particular client situations and client problems. It's exactly what solicitors do all the time, day in, day out. They don't just recall the law or tell their client the law says this. They say, this is what it means for you. So we will assess that functioning legal knowledge through 2 separate examinations. We call them FLK1, Functioning Legal Knowledge 1, and FLK2, Functioning Legal Knowledge 2. And that will be 10 hours in total, and throughout all of that, there will be unflagged ethical questions which will pervade. Really, really important for us. It's obviously critically important to clients and to us as a regulator that solicitors are able to spot ethical problems and act appropriately, know what the relevant principles are, what the code of conduct says, and what an appropriate response is in particular subject, in particular contexts and particular areas. And so those ethical questions will pervade the whole of SQE1, and indeed we'll see SQE2 as well.
And it says 10 hours in total of assessment there. So is that split between 2 5-hour exams, or how does that work? Yep.
So 2 separate papers, but the papers will come in 2 parts. You know, we recognise it's not reasonable for people to sit through one paper 5 hours long. So obviously that will be split into 2 separate sittings. So people might have 4 sittings of 4 separate papers, but there'll be 2 separate assessments. As I say, FLK1 and FLK2, and each of those FLK functioning legal knowledge assessments will be in 2 parts.
And these are multiple choice single best answer questions for this, and I think we talked elsewhere about what the benefits are of using that technique for this assessment.
That's quite right, yes. So single best answer questions, that does mean people have to use an element of judgment, but of course for each question there will only ever be one right answer. And what this enables us to do is to test a breadth of knowledge across the wide range of legal topics that we will be assessing through SQE1, and it also enables us to mark those questions objectively, so that we know that the marking system is as fair as it can be.
Okay, that's great, and we'll talk a bit about SQE2, how that doesn't use multiple choice and has a different way of testing. But let's move on to the next slide, which lists what is covered in FLK1 and FLK2. Do you just want to talk through that, Julie?
Yeah, so the thing that's interesting here that you will see on these slides is that these topics are a combination of substantive law and also procedural law. So for example, in FLK1, you can see there that we will be assessing contract law and tort, as well as dispute resolution. So the process involved in bringing a claim to court, as well as perhaps some of the substantive legal issues that are involved in the dispute between the parties. And similarly in FLK2, it's both criminal law and criminal practice. So the issues around substantive criminal offences, sentencing, evidence, as well as the procedure involved in bringing a case to court. Similarly, there's both land law and property law and practice there. So it integrates both substantive law and procedural law in each of those two assessments.
And will they be tested in the order as listed on that slide, or jumbled up?
Yep, they will be jumbled up, so you won't have a batch of questions which comes under the heading of business law and practice, and then a next batch of questions which comes under the heading of dispute resolution. They will be all jumbled up because the first thing you have to do as a solicitor is, when the client comes and tells you they have a problem, is to work out what the relevant legal principles are that relate to that problem. You're not going to have, or you're unlikely to have a client who comes through the door who says, oh, I've got a really naughty tort question for you. You will have a client who comes and tells you the facts of what has happened to them, and then you as their solicitor have to work out what the relevant legal principles are that apply to their situation.
That's really useful to know. And I suppose just my final question on this SQE1 is, if you pass FLK1 but say you fail FLK2, do you have to resit the whole thing again, or do you just resit part of it again? How does that work?
Yeah, so they're two separate standalone assessments. In the first instance, people must take both together, but if you pass one and fail the other, then you can bank what you have passed and you only need to attempt the what you have failed. Now you have 6 years overall to pass SQE. Once you get to the end of that 6 years, if you still haven't got through all the elements of SQE, you do have to go back to the beginning and start all over again. But during that 6-year period, the elements that you have passed you can bank, and you have up to 3 attempts to pass each of those elements within that 6-year period.
Well, let's be positive and pretend we have passed SQE1, and that would enable me to move on to SQE2, and understand you can't take SQE2 until you've passed SQE1. So we've passed SQE1. What's covered in SQE2?
So as you said before, Ben, SQE1 uses multiple choice questions to test the range, the breadth of legal knowledge that is covered within the assessment specification. SQE2 still assesses legal knowledge, but it also assesses legal skills. So it assesses candidates' ability to apply legal knowledge to a series of tasks and transactions which are similar to those which you might expect a newly qualified solicitor to carry out in practice. And actually we weight that 50-50. So 50% of the marks go for application of legal knowledge and 50% of the marks go for skills.
So it'd be very unlikely, for instance, you'd be able to pass that assessment if you had brilliant skills, but your knowledge or application of knowledge wasn't up to scratch, or vice versa.
That's right. It's you know, what we found when we piloted this is that in most cases there was a reasonable consistency actually between people's ability to apply legal knowledge accurately and to use their skills appropriately and effectively. So what we would see is we look at that. We look at the 50% of the legal knowledge, we look at the 50% of the skills, and we do then make an overall judgment about people's ability across the range to use both of those.
And I think the majority of the tests are written, but there are oral ones in there. How is that spread out? That's spread out over a number of days, those tests?
That's right. So you're quite right. As this slide says, overall there are 16 tests, so there are quite a lot of tests. There are 4 oral tests and 12 written tests. So if you think SQE2, there's SQE2 oral and there's SQE2 written. Now the SQE2 written will take place over 3 days, and within each of those days you will do a range of the different tasks. You'll do a case and matter analysis, a piece of legal drafting, a piece of legal research, and a piece of legal writing. And they will be, as we'll see in a moment, in different practice contexts, but in each of those days, those 3 days, you will do one each of those exercises. And those will be available around the world, throughout England and Wales, through the Pearson VUE testing centres. The oral skills assessments, those 4 oral skills assessments, will take place over 2 days, and each of those days there will be an advocacy exercise and an interview and advising exercise, and those will be available just in our dedicated centres, our specialist centres for the oral skills assessments, to make sure that we can give all candidates a consistent experience of taking the assessments, the oral skills assessments.
So if we've got that slide up showing what you talked about, the skills that are going to be assessed, but also across 5 contexts,
yes,
as well as ethics being tested.
Yeah.
Is that does everyone have to be tested in those contexts? And how will it be tested across all 5 contexts, or will it just be one, or how will that work?
Yep. So it will be tested across all 5 contexts. So the range of skills will be tested across all 5 contexts. Now, clearly, we're not assessing every skill in every context, but we'll be sampling all of those skills across those 5 contexts. So everybody needs to be ready to be assessed in those skills in any of those contexts. And everybody will take exactly the same assessment so that we can be sure on a consistent basis that everybody has performed to the same standard. And you're quite right to pick up ethics a moment ago. So ethics again will pervade these exercises. So in these tasks that we set candidates, there may or may not be an ethical question, and it will be for candidates to spot whether there is an ethical issue, and if so, to address it appropriately.
Which obviously matches with, hopefully, with real life of a solicitor, that you don't necessarily get
That's
a neat
right.
bow telling you there's an ethical problem. Shall we move on to the last slide then, because there's some further useful resources out there if people want to get more information. Do you just want to explain what we've linked to there, and you can download the slides and click on those links after this webinar if you so wish.
For those of you who want more detail, we have an assessment specification which sets out in a lot of detail what the different SQE1 and SQE2 assessments look like. So have a look at those. And again, we've got sample questions already published for SQE1, and we will be publishing sample questions for SQE2 later this autumn. So in due course, there'll be an assessment specification and sample questions covering all parts of the SQE. So candidates, we hope, will be able to see and understand clearly what the SQE expects them to be able to do, and how they'll be able to demonstrate their competence through the SQE.
That's really useful, Julie. Obviously, one thing we haven't covered in detail on this webinar is details of some of the logistics, like costs and when sittings are. Now, some of that information is already on our website. However, there will be further information coming out on that, and we'll do webinars on that in the future. But otherwise, thank you, Julie, for running through that. as ever, if you've got any questions, put them in the comments, and we'll get back to you on that. But otherwise, anything finally to add from you, Julie, or
no? We are done. The keep in touch page is our last slide. We're very keen to hear from you, so please do send us your queries, your observations. Please take a look at the SQE resources that are there. They're growing all the time, and they're growing actually in response to the queries that we see coming through, so you can help shape the resources that we put out there.
Well, thank you very much, Julie, and hope everyone has a great day.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.